So today is a very auspicious day. In fact, we celebrated the birthday of Srima Sarada Devi on 15th of this month. But being a Sunday, we thought more people would be able to attend the birthday celebrations. So normally, as is the practice, we conduct the birthday celebrations on the Sunday following the actual birthday according to the Hindu calendar. So according to the Hindu calendar, the 170th birthday of Srima Sarada Devi was celebrated on 15th, and today morning we had a puja worship, regular worship, and it was just concluded. People were in a hurry to leave. Only a few are here. Most of you I see are online, and partly the World Cup final is one of the reasons. So people are keen to, because everybody has a priority in life. Obviously, it's all in place, because if everybody were to be spiritual, somebody asked this question to Holy Mother. And then she said, why is there so much suffering in this world if God is kind? But then why blame God for everything? When we take our own decisions, God has given us a very sweet will. So there's a very interesting story about free will and the will of God. How to reconcile? If everything is the will of God, then we are not responsible. But if everything is free will, then we alone are responsible. So what is the solution? It's an eternal problem. Every religion has tried to explain it. The saints would obviously say it's all the will of God, because they rely more upon God than the world around them. They know the ephemeral or the transitory nature of this world, or the helplessness we as human beings have, the helplessness to decide what we really want to do and to decide our destiny or our future. Only wise people realize that, and then they surrender to the will of the Lord. When free will works, when it works, it's fine. But when our free will doesn't work the way we would like it to, then we start blaming others, start blaming God, and then curse everybody except ourselves, though we want a free will. But wise people in every religion, they say that if we surrender to the will of God or some supreme power, whatever may be the nature of that God or reality, and they feel that way we are relieved of blaming either others or ourselves. But God has kept a little bit of free will to do the things which are really beneficial for us, ourselves, and avoid those things that are harmful for us. So that little discrimination he has given. So Sri Ramakrishna used to give a beautiful example. You see, through parables he used to explain so many intricate problems. The difference between free will, how much of our life is free will and how much is dependent on God's will, what is the proportion? These are the eternal questions. So he said, imagine a cow is tied to a pole and it has a long rope, and it is tied to that because the owner doesn't want that cow to escape. So it's tied it, but he has given a little freedom. The rope is long enough so it can graze the grass around that pole. But it has a limit. It cannot graze beyond a certain limit. Its movement is restricted to the circle that is formed by that rope which is tied to the pole there. But if God wills, that's how Sri Ramakrishna is explaining, the relationship between free will and God's will. It's a very simple example but profound in meaning. So Sri Ramakrishna says, imagine it's God's will that has given you a certain length of rope, and within the limits of that rope, you are free to graze wherever you like in that circumference. But if suppose you have exhausted all the grass that is within that circumference, then God is, if He is gracious enough, He extends that cord, gives you a little more, He increases the length of the rope so that you can find better grass elsewhere. So that's how the combination of free will and God's will work. When we have used our free will to a good purpose and it is in harmony with God's will, then out of His grace, God's grace, He lengthens the rope. He gives us more freedom. We like freedom. Everybody wants to be free. But unfortunately, our freedom is restricted by our wrong decisions, wrong choices that we make, and then we blame God for it. But God says, if you use your free will wisely, just as the cow does, it eats all the grass which is given, and it does not yearn to eat the grass which is beyond its limit. If that is there, if you are content in life, then through God's will, when God comes and just as the master of that particular cow extends the length of the rope. So, Holy Mother used to say, among all the virtues, she has, if you see Srima Sarada Devi's wonderful life and teachings, she is least philosophical among all the three. Sri Ramakrishna, of course, spoke in a very simple language through parables, as did all the great masters, Buddha, Jesus. They all spoke in wonderful parables, very easy to understand. Swami Vivekananda, of course, took those parables, which are apparently very simple but profound in meaning, and expanded it so that intellectuals can understand. Because sometimes things are deceptively simple. The parables, they are so deceptively simple that when you ponder over those parables and try to apply it to your own lives, to our own lives, when we try to apply those parables, we find that there is a lot of significance, there is a lot of hidden meaning which we don't realize. We think the parable is simple enough to understand. So if you see in the lives of Sri Ramakrishna, Ma Sharda and Swami Vivekananda, if you just compare, they spoke the same truth. In fact, whatever Sri Ramakrishna said, Holy Mother once remarked that I say nothing new, I just say what I heard from my master. So she said nothing new, but she made some very practical remarks. That's the great thing about her, that she hardly had the so-called divine visions. At least even if she had, she never disclosed. Like Sri Ramakrishna, his life is full of divine modes, so many spiritual varieties of spiritual practices. But if you see the life, wonderful life of Srima Sarada Devi, whose 170th birthday we are celebrating, we all will find that it's one of the simplest lives ever lived by such a great spiritual personality. In fact, Sri Ramakrishna, when he was about to leave this his earthly existence, he was about to terminate his earthly existence, he called her and said, see, my state is like a drum. A lot of people have beaten the drum and it's worn out. The drum will no longer produce any sound. It's like a worn out drum. So it is for you to take forward this message. So she said, as normally women would do, in India especially in those days, The idea of women's empowerment was almost unheard of. So for everything, women depended on men. So she said, I am just a woman, what can I do? So he said, no, I have done very little. In fact, you have to do much more. So the significance we can understand if we see the life of Srima Sharda Devi later on in life. She lived out, she survived her husband for nearly 34 years more. He passed away in 1886 and she entered into Mahasamadhi in 1920. So true to his prophecy, she had much more to do as far as spiritual administration is concerned, as far consolidation of the Ramakrishna order is concerned, as far as guiding the disciples of Sri Ramakrishna as well as the new disciples who would come later are concerned. It was she who assumed a much bigger role than Sri Ramakrishna himself. This was pointed out, though this was known to all the direct disciples. It was Swami Vivekananda who once mentioned about the great significance of the life of Srima Sharda Devi. He said, because you see, it was normally in a male dominated society, and that includes the field of religion, it is, society was, you may say, a bit unkind to women. If you see the entire history of mankind, always it always has been a male dominated society, right from maybe for some physical reasons, but whatever it may be, in every aspect of life, social, political, economic, as well as religious, particularly religious, you will find woman has always been subservient to men. In all the previous, you take the incarnation of Buddha, if you consider him to be an incarnation or a prophet, see all the prophets before this, either most of them did not have any spouses or spiritual consorts as she is known, or even if they had, Rama had Sita, but Rama was more prominent. Take Krishna for example. Everybody who came as a spouse or maybe as a spiritual consort, they assumed a secondary role in the life of that prophet or incarnation. But for the first time in the history of the spiritual history of the world, Swami Vivekananda points out, don't you see it is as clear as daylight? Here it is Ma Sarada Devi who is assuming a much larger role than Sri Ramakrishna himself. Though he named the order of monks after Sri Ramakrishna, we all know towards the end of his life, Swami Vivekananda wanted to start an order for nuns first. He said it's the mothers and women, the women and the mothers, daughters and the mothers first, then sons and the fathers. So he would have, if society had permitted, unfortunately society did not permit, it was too orthodox during his time, he would have started the women's order first. And he mentioned that because Holy Mother Sri Sharda Devi was alive. So even before starting the Ramakrishna order of monks, he said, I would die peacefully if I can start a women's order with Ma Sharda Devi in the center. Because he firmly believed, as he mentioned in one of his letters to his Guru Bhais, he said, I am really surprised that you don't understand the significance of Srima Sharda Devi. She was living an unobtrusive life, quiet life in the village of Jairambati, showing apparently no external leadership qualities. A very quiet life lived within the household. Of course, that household was visited by so many people, men, women, and disciples of Sri Ramakrishna and others. There was a constant flow of people, even in that remote village. She came to Calcutta much later in 1910. But between 1886 and 1910, it was a very simple life lived in a rural setting, and people failed to notice her the significance or importance of that great life. So Swami Vivekananda, before his passing away, said, "It's really surprising none of you have understood the significance of Srima Sarada Devi's life. She was born to revive the ideal of motherhood of God." This was an idea which was rather very new to the Western civilization. Even within India, except for a few sects which worshipped God as the mother, this idea of worshipping God as the mother, as opposed to most of the Semitic religions where God is a father. So, to revive the idea of motherhood of God, he said, Srima Sarada Devi has incarnated, or Sri Ramakrishna has revived that ideal by bringing his spiritual consort, who was, of course, much younger than him in age, and that's the reason why she lived longer, nearly 34 years. The spiritual ministration took place, and she continued the mission for which Sri Ramakrishna had came. And Sri Ramakrishna himself said, Swami Vivekananda himself said that it is to revive this ideal of motherhood of God, or ideal of motherhood itself, that she was born. And with her as the center, the ideal of the motherhood of God and the resultant women's empowerment, true spiritual empowerment. Because there were so many empowerment movements which began. Even while Swami Vivekananda was in England, Henrietta Muller, many of the women had gathered together, but they were mostly political or movements. They wanted equality as far as voting rights are concerned, as far as economic opportunities are concerned, education is concerned. But they rarely touched the spiritual field because it was too difficult for women to challenge the supremacy, the male domination of the churches of the world. I'm not specifically referring to even within Hinduism. The monastic orders were predominantly controlled by men. And maybe in other fields, as Betty Friedan and the feminist movement, which became very popular in the early 20th century, you can say. And women started fighting for educational rights, then political rights, rights to vote. Even they didn't have rights to vote. So all these developments were taking place. But in the background, much before these feminist movements were becoming popular, first in England and simultaneously in America as well, and Europe later on. When these movements were gaining popularity, Swami Vivekananda came to this country and explained to these people the significance of Holy Mother's life, who was still alive and living there and trying in her own way to spiritually empower not only women but also men. So it was something unheard of, and Swamiji very clearly said, and he of course unfortunately could not do it because society did not permit that during his lifetime, but he would have rather seen a women's mutt. He said women's mutt centered around Sarada Devi. And he was very clear because he saw the lessons of history, the great Buddhist movement, where with great reluctance Buddha admitted his own wife because his disciples said all the Sangha should admit women. Buddha was against it, but the disciples put so much of pressure. But still, women were always subservient. So also all the other religions, women could not head the order, or maybe the order of nuns, even if within their own limited sect, they could be the heads, but overall, the say the position of a pope or something, it was not open, or it is still not open for women. So Swamiji knew, Swami Vivekananda very clearly knew. So right from the beginning, he wanted to separate these two movements. And he knew ultimately women have to solve their own problems. And they should be independent. And they should be free to decide what their problems are and how they'll go about solving them. So he was very clear that these two movements have to be separated. Unfortunately, he didn't have the means and the resources and the people, above all, women who could take up this job. Though he requested Nivedita and several other, Margaret Noble, because he knew there was some kind of economic, social, and political empowerment taking place in these Western countries, especially England and America. So he expected some of the Western women to come forward to help him in this mission of spiritual empowerment. Mind you, it is not socio-economic empowerment. That movement was already going on, and some of the Western disciples, like Henrietta Muller, expected Swami Vivekananda to help them in their endeavor here. They had a very strong movement, they were trying to fight for their rights. But Swamiji said men cannot decide or fight for women's rights. They have to do it themselves. He was very clear about that. So he refused. I mean, in a sense, though Henrietta Muller and all, they were very good disciples, he very clearly explained to Nivedita when she decided to go to India to do the work for empowerment, the educational empowerment, social and political, because that was more needed in India more than in the Western countries. So she said, why don't you come and educate our young girls? So in future, that will lead to spiritual empowerment. And that he wished that spiritual empowerment would take place. That was his dream, with Ma Sarada Devi as the center. But this, unfortunately, people were not there. Women, educated women who could take this responsibility were not there. In fact, there is a very interesting incident. Very few people know about this. When Swami Vivekananda came to England for the third time, there was one woman who was inspired by Sri Ramakrishna. Her name was Gaurima. She was a traditional nun, in the sense, just as men, wander all over India, all over different places. They go to places of pilgrimage, wander alone without any money. Men normally do it, but to imagine a woman doing it was unheard of in those days, very rare. Women could go out alone, and she was so courageous, so fearless, that she was quite older than Swami Vivekananda himself, and she came to Sri Ramakrishna. Sri Ramakrishna blessed her. So Gaurima started a Saradeshwari ashrama in Calcutta, and her sister's daughter, who died, and she was orphaned. So she took her under her care, and she later on became the next president of that Saradeshwari small ashrama. That little girl, when she was 7 or 8 years old, I believe, Swami Vivekananda, when he came to England, it's a very beautiful incident, nice incident. He saw some of the girls, very few, some Indian girls belonging to some aristocratic families who could afford, they were sent to England for higher education, because there were hardly any institutions for women in India. So some of them came. Seeing them, for this young girl, who Gaurima was the founder of Saradeshwari Ashram, but this young girl, her niece, who was under her care. So Swami Vivekananda gave a fantastic idea to them. Said, why don't you send, I will take care of her education. I have devotees, well-wishers in England who can educate this girl here. And in fact, even purchased a nice dress, a British type of dress for that small girl who was still in India. And he said he took that as a gift when he went to India for the third time or the second time from England. And he said, I would wish that you send her for higher education. After she finishes her education, you mold her. If the nun is educated, then she'll do much more than an uneducated one. So we would like, so that was a dream, some kind of dream which Swamiji had, which was, he was far ahead of his times, you can say. India would not accept it. Even why India, even the other countries, they were not in a position to give that kind of economic, social, political, or leave alone spiritual freedom. It was something unimaginable in those days. But Swami Vivekananda dreamt of it, and ultimately that dream came true in 1953, when a group of young women, all of whom were initiated by Holy Mother Sarada Devi herself. It did not happen during her lifetime. They were very young in the early 20s, in 1920 when Holy Mother passed away. But they were companions, some of them served the Holy Mother. So a group of nuns were finally admitted independently, not as part of the Ramakrishna mission, but a separate order was created. And because Swami Vivekananda believed that it's for women to solve women's problems, men should not be dictating what constitutes their true welfare. So let them decide. When many times he was asked questions, there were so many issues in India regarding widow remarriage, and so many orthodox ideas were there, maybe a lot of superstitions as well. And many questions were asked by the people who were educated, young men especially. A lot of discussion was going on, and even the British government was keen to bring about some reforms, helped by some liberal people from Hindu society. So they were talking about widow remarriage, and whether, because widows normally did not remarry according to the Hindu Orthodox tradition. So there were so many social issues which were being discussed in India in those days, especially among the Hindu community and even the other communities there. So once a group of men who thought it is their duty to rescue women or to work for their welfare, they came and asked Swamiji. So he gave them a very blunt answer. He said, am I a woman that I should be solving their problems? Why do you interfere? Let them decide. All you have to do is educate them. Once they have their education, once they stand on their own feet, then let them decide their future. It's always been the bane of humanity that men have decided the future of women or what they should do. He said, for a while you just don't interfere. Let them solve their own problems. Let them, the only thing you can help them with is to make facilities for their education. That's why Sister Nivedita was instructed, though she wanted to do many things like political. She was one of the ladies who inspired the revolutionaries to fight for freedom. But Swamiji tried to tone down her. She was very aggressive as far as the revolutionary movement was concerned. She secretly helped many people. But Swamiji was against that. He said, you should not be. I have sent you specifically for a purpose, to educate the women. Let them get educated. Let them think for themselves and let them solve their own problems. Who are you to dictate? Whether they want the Western model of women's empowerment, whether they want the Eastern, whether they want to mix both, let them decide. Why should you think this is good? What is good for you may not be good for them. You just give them ideas, give them all the noble ideas, and let them decide their future for themselves. So this kind of freedom freedom to think independently, freedom to decide their own future, and finally, freedom to become spiritual personalities themselves and guide others in the spiritual path, which was, you can safely say, never before attempted in the history of, if you see the history of spiritual history of mankind, a totally independent spiritual movement run by women for women themselves is unheard of. Somewhere there is some control by men. So this was one of the main reasons, and on this day we have to think about this, because Swami Vivekananda mentioned it to one of his Guru Bhais. He said, it's shame on you that you have not understood the significance of Ma Sarada Devi's advent. Don't think she's just a spiritual, she's a wife of your Guru. She has an independent role to play, far more independent than you might have conceived yourselves. She was a spiritual companion of Sri Ramakrishna, but if you see right from the beginning, though there was the age difference between them was quite large. I mean, they were Holy Mother was much younger than Sri Ramakrishna, but their lives ran almost parallel to each other. They lived in the same premises of Dakshineshwar, but there were months and months had passed before they saw each other. She was leading an independent life, though she was married to Sri Ramakrishna. And just as she did not interfere in anything, any spiritual, Sri Ramakrishna no doubt guided her, taught her the techniques of meditation and all, but her spiritual life ran independent of Sri Ramakrishna's, because he knew she had a larger role to play for a much longer time. So that independence was there right from the beginning. And if you see the incidents, various incidents of her life, especially the rural woman of Bengal in those days, how subservient, they could not take their own decisions, they could not walk alone, they could not go, everything had to be decided by the male member of the family. And widows had practically no exposure. They were literally imprisoned within the house. There were so many restrictions on them, and moreover they could not remarry. So there were a lot of social issues, but within that system, within that orthodox system which was prevailing, you see the wonderful life of Sri Ma Sarada Devi. If you see, it was more modern than the most modern woman of the West. She was independent. Nobody, even the great Swami Vivekananda who started the order, Ramakrishna movement, whenever any important decision had to be made, he used to go and take her advice. Apparently illiterate woman, but see the power she wielded, not power in the sense of domination. It was a very quiet, gentle power which is born out of inherent spirituality. Spiritual power does not express itself just as political or power of wealth expresses itself. It's all outward power. It doesn't last long. But spiritual power goes deeper. It has a deeper impact because it is quiet, it is unassuming, and it works more powerfully. So that great mighty Swami Vivekananda, he was forced to take certain decisions when the political situation was very bad, when there was famine and other things. All the decisions he took, some of them were totally overruled by Sri Ma Sarada Devi, and he never argued. In fact, one of the things he wanted to do when there was plague, there were hardly any funds. So the broad heart of Swami Vivekananda, he said, let us sell the mutt grounds and sell everything, because they didn't have money to serve the plague patients. Sister Nivedita and some of the other disciples, they were keen to work, but there was hardly any money to to nurse the plague patients. Plague was dreaded in those days. People were just running away from Calcutta. And these people were working day and night, but they were short of funds. And Swami Vivekananda said, let us see, we are monks, we can live under the tree. We were living a wandering life earlier, now we have this land. Let us sell the land and with that money serve these patients who are dying. But it was Holy Mother who interfered. She said, how can you sell? It's not in your name. Though she had no education, she said, you are just a trustee of this. How can you take a unilateral decision? You can't sell the mutt. And moreover, money will come. But this whole movement which has been started in the name of Sri Ramakrishna, it has a significance far beyond the temporary measure that you are going to take. So you can't sell that. And she was quite firm about it. And Swamiji just dropped that plan. So there are several other decisions which was taken by her even after the passing away of Swami Vivekananda. The movement had passed through a lot of crises. I mean, the political, the financial crisis, and all through that she was the mother figure. I would not say the father figure. Sri Ramakrishna was the father figure, but it was the mother power that manifested through her. So that is what Swami Vivekananda meant when he told his Guru Bhais that you have yet to understand the significance of the advent of Ma Sarada Devi. She will be an object lesson for future generations. That's why Nivedita very famously wrote, is she the last of an old order of women, or is she the first of the new order of women? So she was unable to unfathom the significance of mother's life. Though she was very close, Nivedita was lovingly called by her Khuki. Khuki in Bengali means daughter. So she looked upon Holy Mother and was always trying to get some kind of guidance and spiritual energy from Holy Mother. All her activities which she did, like empowerment, the starting of the girls' school, in which she faced a lot of difficulties. Now and then she used to go to Mother and get a lot of support. And it was the Holy Mother who used to tell the daughters of the devotees who were reluctant to send girls. In those days, girls were hardly 1% of women were getting primary education in India. That was the sad state of affairs. Just 1 or 2%. Only a few aristocratic girls could get education, mainly by home tutors. Women or men used to come and teach them in the house. They were reluctant to send their young daughters to the school. Society was so orthodox. So Nivedita had a very difficult time. It was Holy Mother, in fact, who used to tell the devotees, why don't you send your girl? In fact, some of the widows, the law was passed by the British to enable some of these young widows to remarry. Because otherwise the life would be miserable if they're just depending and they're confined to a particular, something like imprisonment for these young girls. So a reform was actually took place, and many of the political leaders and the social leaders of those days, they encouraged widow remarriage. So this question was taken, it was a hot topic for discussion. What should we do with these young girls? Once her husband dies at a very young age, what do we really do with them? And education was out of question. They would hardly leave their house. They had to be confined, wear white saris, not mix with people, eat simple food. There was a lot of austerity they had to do. So life was miserable if somebody lost their husband. They could not remarry, though some people advocated remarriage for them. But Holy Mother, in those days of orthodoxy, when the daughters of certain devotees who used to come and tell that Sister Nivedita is trying to uh, take my daughter to her school, but I don't want to agree because it's against the social custom. How can these young girls go on the streets? So Holy Mother said, why? If she gets education, your widowed daughter, she can stand on her own legs. This was something now, today it appears to be very logical, but in those days, this was something which no family would agree to. And when she was finding it difficult to get students for her school, not necessarily widows, but even other girls, people, they used to marry them off at the age of 10, 12. It was very common, child marriage. But even in those days, Holy Mother told the women, said, why are you making that girl, converting her into a slave? You yourself are suffering from so much of bondage. Can't you imagine a better life for your girls? Can you not send them to Nivedita school so that they can follow a profession and be on their own? If they want to be on their own, why can't you support them? So these liberal ideas, she was not educated in a university. Holy Mother was not, but she had the foresight. She understood, and she understood the idea of true empowerment, educational, social, political, as well as spiritual. So that makes the empowerment complete of a woman. So that is what Swami Vivekananda had in mind when he said the girls in your school should be trained in such a way, it's not enough to just make them economically independent. That society has done now. To a large extent, women are independent, economically at least. They are on par with men. That economic empowerment took place, and it had already started during Swamiji's time and Holy Mother's time, especially in the Western countries. But Swamiji wanted to go a step further. And for that reason, he wanted the girls of this country, more and more girls, more than boys, to come abroad, broaden their vision, see what is there, what are the good things they can learn from the West, what are the good things they can preserve that they already possess, the cultural and spiritual heritage, try to merge them and create a new kind of women, create new kind of women who would represent, the best kind of empowerment that can be possibly. We talk of women's empowerment, but normally, even today, it is restricted to socio-economic and political empowerment. In some countries, it is still difficult to imagine a woman as a head of the state, where they have to control the defense forces. America, for example, with all its liberal attitude and all, they still don't think a president of United States could be a woman. It may take place, but it has taken so many years. Who could be the chief of the armed forces? Because that's what the president is supposed to do. So they think it's even that empowerment people are not willing to grant. And as far as spiritual empowerment is concerned, I think it will take ages for churches and other religious organizations to even imagine an independent order where women are the spiritual heads and they decide their own future. So that is the kind of empowerment which Holy Mother, Swami Sri Ramakrishna trained Holy Mother for. And Swami Vivekananda was the only disciple who could clearly see it and spell it out. Maybe it will take some few more centuries to understand the significance of her life and message, because we hardly read. our religion consists in attending certain functions. That's why I was really, people are happy all over the world. I'm not specifically referring to any particular religious community. We are happy with what the church or the temples or the mosques advise us to do. Very rarely we think deeply about the relevance of the lives and messages of these great prophets. They are far deeper than what we really understand. We depend on interpretations which are given to us by people who want some kind of institutionalization of the religion. Christ did not start an institution, nor did Krishna, nor did all these great prophets came, gave a message which is simple for every human being to understand in his own way and apply it to his own life. We may require some help to understand what is said in the scriptures, because we may not understand the language in which it is spoken, so we have translations. But beyond that, if there are too many interpretations, that is why when Swami Vivekananda, somebody, he said, go back to the Vedas, he told the Hindus. Similarly, when he would address the Christians here, who thought organized religion is the only way to Christ, he said, go back to Christ. You have Christ, just go back to him, go back to the source. And he would not hesitate to tell it to all the different religions. The founders themselves came with an undiluted, eternal, universal message, which was for all humanity. But when we try to organize it and restrict it, then it loses its vitality. That's why Swami Vivekananda once said, not that he knew the importance of an organized religion, because otherwise people are used to this kind of thing. Our society itself runs on the principles of organization, the organization of marriage, the organization of different castes, classes, different categories, different groups. That's human nature. We cannot but classify ourselves and identify ourselves with certain groups. But our search for truth should not end with that group. It may begin in a group, but it has to go far beyond. It's an individual journey. And Holy Mother was an excellent example of that. Her life was so independent that people, even today, if you try to just read that great biography, you'll try to understand in those circumstances how independent she was. Not even dependent on Sri Ramakrishna, though she was married to him. She used to stay hardly a few hundred feet in that Nahabat, and she really lived the life of a nun, though she hardly met. There were other people who would get more chances. In fact, the only time she went to him was to take some simple food for him, because his health was not good towards the end of his life. Even then, some devotees would run, some women devotees and others, they wanted to serve Sri Ramakrishna, their guru. So they say, Mother, can you please give me? So even that, for days together, she perhaps never met, but she never cared, because her life was independent. She had her own life which was running parallel. No doubt he trained her in the initial stages, explained all the different sadhanas, the upasanas, the methods of spiritual practice. But after that, she had her own spiritual life, which was quite independent. And not only that, she took the responsibility of numerous disciples, which Swami Sri Ramakrishna had clearly told her. He said, I have done very little, you have to do much more. So you can imagine the thousands and thousands of disciples who came to her. In fact, some of the direct disciples of Sri Ramakrishna, who were great monks, they even hesitated to accept some as disciples, not knowing the background. And when they were doubtful, they were feeling that I cannot take the responsibility of this particular disciple who has come seeking for spiritual guidance. They would say, you go to the Holy Mother, and she would accept everybody without even questioning them, because she had the power to digest whatever nature might be. These people were very selective. Even Sri Ramakrishna was selective. He would not initiate people unless he found that they are ready. But when everybody was reluctant, Swami Brahmananda was the first president, then there were so many other direct disciples, monastic disciples, who used to initiate young aspirants who used to come, or people who used to seek mantra diksha or initiation. But sometimes even they were reluctant. They found that this person doesn't have the background or the spiritual quality to become a disciple. But if they insisted, they said, okay, then you try with the Holy Mother. And she would accept everybody, even the worst among the people who would come, and bless them. So that shows the capacity, the infinite capacity of Srima Sarada Devi as a spiritual guru or a teacher, which she did for a very long time, till the last day of her life, practically till the last day. She never used to turn away anybody. That's why you find, in fact, there were so many innumerable disciples. She has even given spiritual instructions on a railway station. A poor porter just came and fell at her feet, and he was a great devotee of Rama. So naturally, those who are devoted to Rama will be very much devoted to Sita as well. If you know the Ramayana, there is. So he just came and fell flat at her feet on a railway station and asked her, see, I would, if Rama were to be alive, or if Sita were to be alive today, she asked, what do you want? And this porter, the very illiterate person, he said, I feel that you are Sita herself, Janaki herself. If she were to come suddenly appear before me, I am doing the same thing. I am doing the thing which I would do before her. I want you to bless me with a mantra. So he fell at her feet in the railway station, and within a few minutes she took some Ganges water and gave initiation to that young man on the platform itself. So a large number of young, old people, some of them belonging to other religions. The famous Parsi actor Sohrab Modi, who was one of the greatest actors of those times, he played many mythological characters in films. So he heard somewhere that there is this great lady. He was already in his late 70s. So he just came all the way from Mumbai. It's so difficult to travel from one part of India to the other. And he was so keen that he fell flat. He was a very, very famous actor in those days, one of the best actors of Hindi cinema. and he was a Parsi, a Persian, in Zoroastrian. He followed a Zoroastrian religion, Sohrab Modi. So he came and fell flat at the feet of Mother, and he was initiated by her in Udbodhan. So she would not distinguish between people belonging to any religion, any caste, any creed. There was the so-called untouchables. There were so many untouchables who were treated as untouchables because of certain caste restrictions, orthodox caste restrictions. People who did menial work were considered to be untouchables. Even they were welcome. They were not only welcome, they used to come, have food with other so-called high caste people, and many of them would go away. She said, let them go away, but these people will eat here only. So she did not discriminate between people. And of course, so many of the Western disciples, like Josephine McLeod, and there were others, Sister Christine, who were all no doubt inspired by Vivekananda. But after his passing away in 1902, including Nivedita, Sister Christine, and some of the other Western women disciples, if you see, most of them went. Mrs. Sarah Bull, and all these women used to go. Obviously, she could not speak English. I do not know how they communicated. But whatever little Bengali she spoke, they obviously could understand. In fact, Nivedita learnt enough Bengali to understand. And she has written some beautiful reminiscences of Srima Sarada Devi, who always used to inspire her because she felt alone after the passing away of Swamiji. There was none to support her. No funds to run the school, even to run the school. And Swami Vivekananda had told her very clearly, you have to solve your own problems. Don't hang on to any men or any organization. If you can do it alone. Otherwise, don't do it. So she found it was a very, very, very difficult in the early stages. There was so much of orthodoxy, and Swamiji had warned her that you don't know what kind of situation is there in India. But still, if you have the courage to work there, then you are welcome. But he taught her some lessons and told her that when you are doing work, you have to, for work, especially for women, I want the women to be self-dependent. Today I may help you, I may ask somebody to help you. Hundreds of men will come to help you. But that would not solve the purpose. You will still not be empowered. So if you want true empowerment, maybe it is a struggle now, but that is what you have to do. So she had to come back to America, to England, and write books, sell the books, get some money. It was such a difficult task for her. But all through, it was Holy Mother who inspired her, blessed her every time she expressed, because she could not turn to anybody else. As Swamiji had told her not to approach the mission or any other male organization which was run by men. Though there were many people, the Tagore and all, they were ready to help her. But she remembered what her guru said. You have to be independent if you want to really empower yourself. And you will be an object lesson to the women who are studying, the girls who are studying in your school. So for a change, why can't you solve your own problem? So this is apparently a very simple thing, but it is for the first time anything of this sort was attempted. So you may, in Sister Nivedita's own words, you may say, she was the first of a new order of women rather than the last of the old order of women. Because there is a tendency to call personalities of the bygone age and say, oh, they belong to that age, everything was different. They belong to the past. Those ideals don't work now. So that is why Nivedita very clearly says, she is not the last of the old order of women. She is the first of the new order of women which will be inspired. So that leaves a lot of things to be explained. We have to go deep enough. Because when in 1953 the Sarada Mutt was started, it was then 33 years after her passing away that the first big biography of Holy Mother was published. It was before that, it was only Sri Ramakrishna's biography written by Max Muller and Roma Rolla, which became popular all over the world. People had hardly heard of Srima Sarada Devi except one or two chapters in their lives. So people hardly knew who this woman was, who not only survived Sri Ramakrishna but also Swami Vivekananda, who died very young, 1902. So 18 years of very, very important, very significant contribution that she made was not recorded, or it was recorded, but it was not published. Only in 1853, when the first biography, Swami Gambiranji wrote the first English biography based on his own Bengali life, that was the first time she was introduced to the world. And it became so popular, especially in the West, because the gospel was already there. Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna, the great master, and Swami Vivekananda's works were published when they were alive, as early as in 1895. They were available. The London edition of Raj Yoga was published in 1896. So many books were published. People knew about Ramakrishna, people knew about Vivekananda, but nobody had heard of Sri Ma Sarada Devi except that he was the wife of Sri Ramakrishna, and maybe a few references here and there in Swami Vivekananda's letters and complete works. So many of them were not even curious to know who this unassuming woman was and what she was doing behind the scenes. So it was her, you can say, only after 53, Swami Vireshwaranji mentions this, when they first celebrated the centenary of Holy Mother. She was born in 1853, so 1953 was the centenary. So it took 100 years for them to understand, though they understood, to write a proper detailed biography of this great woman. And when they finally did, they found that these books, the biographies, were selling more than the gospel. That's what Vireshwaranji said. First time when the English edition came out, most of our Western centers, they were just gobbled up. They became more popular because the Western women found something very significant, which they would definitely not find in any literature of the world. Something that deals directly with their problems, something that is addressed to them, something that handles or tackles the issues through the issues of complete women's empowerment. So this life, though it was a very, very life led in a very rural setting and practically away from the gaze of this social media, newspapers, unlike Swami Vivekananda, who got so much of publicity in the West, there was hardly any importance given, in the media. Of course, in those days, media was restricted to only newspapers. Other things came much later. But even in newspapers and other things, one could hardly find any material. But once this book was published, surprisingly, they became more popular. And that's why you see the various Sharda convents in America, which were started, in fact, much before the Sharda Mutt was a order run by women for women, was formally inaugurated in 1953. Much before that, a few years before that, reading these books and whatever little material was there. In fact, I was surprised to see a small biography of Srima Sarada Devi written by one Wilfred Illis. She was a disciple of Swami Avyaktananda. She lived in Bath. As early as 1934, I saw two small biographies of Holy Mother. There were some books published here and there, but I was surprised a woman from England, would write her biography much before her Indian authors wrote her life. That was, of course, based on Swami Avyaktananda, who came in 1934. He must have given a lot of first-hand information to this lady who died young, who died because of tuberculosis. So in her name, this booklet has been published. I managed to get a copy. So not that she was not known, but it was a very small introduction to Holy Mother's life. So we came to know about the Holy Mother. The whole world, in fact, especially the Western women, came to know about her in detail only after this 1953, the centenary of her birth. which was celebrated, and the Sarada Mat was started, and the books were published by Ramakrishna order. Later on, they were published by the Sarada Mat as well, but in the beginning, it was published by Madras Mat, our Chennai Mat. So then Vireshwaranji writes that they were surprised. They first thought, here is a life, simple, unassuming life, very quiet life, in a very, very rural setting, which had hardly anything to do with the so-called modern empowered women of the West. How would they take to this? Sri Ramakrishna, we understand, his biography is full of visions, mystic visions, spiritual practices, and great lot of philosophy. But if you read her book, Life as well as teachings, you find only practical teachings, but a very intensely practical. So practical that they are far more superior than all the Vedantic teachings, because her life was a Vedanta in practice. We are used to Vedanta in theory, and we are under a false assumption that we have understood Vedanta. In fact, you will never understand Vedanta, to be very frank, unless you see it lived in a life such as Holy Mother Sarada Devi. She spoke little, she never spoke any philosophy. Show me one philosophical term in her whole conversation, the Gospel of Holy Mother. It's only practical advice, and every advice which she gives or every word she utters is nothing but Vedanta. But because it is simple, because it is apparently very simple, and we are complicated, we want complicated explanations for very basic things, truth has been made complicated by the philosophers, because it takes a complicated explanation to deal with complicated minds like ours. We think we are wise, but if we are really simple, then Holy Mother will appeal to us. The teachings will directly strike us, because she tells only that which you can practice. And finally, in the long run, only that matters in spiritual life. Philosophy really doesn't matter. With all the philosophy, when you come to the truths about spiritual life, the harsh realities of life as well as the solutions that Vedanta proposes, it boils down to simple truths, which are simple to understand but difficult to practice. So as Mahatma Gandhi spoke about Sri Ramakrishna's life, I think if he had read Holy Mother's life, which he obviously did not do, he died much before that, before her life was published, just as he wrote a beautiful introduction. See, the life of Sri Ramakrishna enables you to see God face to face. So that is what her life does. It does not talk about God, but she talks only of how a God-centered life can be lived, which is more important. Knowing about God is one thing, and I conclude with Sri Ramakrishna's nice example which he gave to illustrate this. He said, some people have heard of milk, some people have seen milk, but only a few have tasted milk. So also, if you see the attitude, most of us, we have heard about religion. Some of us, if we are lucky enough, if we have a proper, if we have managed to get some proper guidance, then maybe we would have seen something of religion. But just as we can drink milk, to assimilate religion, it requires a lot of effort, not only effort, but a uncomplicated nature, an uncomplicated mind which can decipher the truths of religion. As Jesus said, you cannot enter the kingdom of heaven unless you be as this child, pointing to some children who were playing. That's one of his famous teachings. Unless you be like little children, you cannot enter the kingdom of heaven. What is the significance? That spiritual life, truly speaking, is something which has to be lived, not just to be heard and to be thought upon and talked about. So this is what Holy Mother has for us. Her life and her message is a life of Vedanta in practice, and all we have to do is try to understand, or maybe try to imitation would not be a good word, but try to imitate what she did, or try to practice what she practiced. Very simple practices. If you see the teachings today, most of the teachings were read by the young children, and Jackie also read out some nice portions about from her life and message. So if we find it is so uncomplicated, so easy to understand, but maybe not as easy to practice. So there are a few questions I would like to just try and answer them, and then we'll, yeah. Somebody is mentioned about, yes, about Sharon is asking a question. If one of the revered Swamijis last week mentioned that one Swami had a doubt over receiving Diksha from a lady. Yes, he mentioned that. He has himself confessed that because of his orthodox training, he said, how can I accept a woman as my guru? That was the condition. It is true. It was 100 years ago. Naturally, people were reluctant. They hardly thought that women were capable of initiating men. So that inferiority complex would have been there. Yeah, continued. Did the young monastics not know Sri Ma's true caliber and equality? Yes, many of the young monastics knew, but it was because Swamiji pointed out to them. You see, our samskaras, they don't go away so easily. We are born and brought up in a society where we have been told that women are always inferior to men. So if with that upbringing, suddenly you can't become liberal. So most of these monastics, they have come from a very orthodox society in those days. So naturally, they would not accept. Even some of the disciples once asked Swami Shardanand, said, you have written a beautiful biography of Sri Ramakrishna, but some of you say that mother is equally great, but I don't see any greatness, because she hardly met anybody. So there was not that kind of spiritual mood, those kind of spiritual moods which Sri Ramakrishna had. So, but Shardanji got terribly angry. He said, do you think Sri Ramakrishna would marry a ordinary woman? So the idea was that we may not understand the greatness, but so naturally these young monastic disciples who came to become monastics, they took their own time to understand. But now, of course, things have changed. We know much more about Holy Mother, and it's easy to identify or maybe recognize her greatness now that all the biographical details are available. Now there's one more question. How could any devotee think, yeah, that's what I mentioned just now, would take an ordinary woman as his wife? Surely they knew the marriage was only spiritual. Yes, I agree. So Raphael is asking questions. Sri Ramakrishna gradually became more and more accepting of all religions, but Holy Mother has been accepting all religions right from the start. Yes. No, Sri Ramakrishna also accepted, not that he gradually accepted. He had accepted right from the beginning. He did not distinguish between this God and that God. That harmony of religions was there that it is there in any true follower of Sanatana Dharma. If you really follow the eternal universal religious principles of the Vedas, then that if you have understood your religion properly, then you have to accept all other religions as well. Because spirituality is not the monopoly of one particular nation or one particular religion or one particular nationality or caste or creed or anything. So she was also like Sri Ramakrishna, Holy Mother also, like Holy Mother, Sri Ramakrishna also had accepted right from the beginning. So I'll conclude now. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Harihi Om Tat Sat. Sri Ramakrishna Arpanamastu.